Welcome everyone to the Alaska Sea Life Center. My name is Darin, and I'm out here in our aviary wearing a mask, and that's to protect the health and safety of our staff, especially the staff who care for the birds here. We want to make sure that those staff stay healthy and can continue their excellent care of our birds here in the Alaska Sea Life Center aviary. Now, the last time we were out was a month or so ago here in the aviary, so I wanted to show you some of the changes that have happened and some of the goings-on here during springtime in the aviary. It's an exciting time, so we're going to take a close look at some of our birds and see what they're up to. Let's switch cameras and see what we can do. Okay, so for starters, our birds have definitely transitioned into the nesting season. And although we may not see a whole lot of activity while we're live here, I promise you, 10 minutes ago, the birds were actively preparing nests. And you can see here the red-legged kittiwakes are positioned right there on a spot where they've begun to build a nest. And the kittiwakes are going to build a nest by sort of stamping down little pads of mud and then adding grass. And so we provide the mud, we harvest the mud from out there in the wild and provide it for those birds to create their little mud nests. Right now they're taking a little break, but if I happen to see that the birds are stamping down their little nests, it is very cute to watch. They just stomp in place as if they're marching and going somewhere. Here's one kind of going through that motion. And of course just took a break again. So those are the red-legged kittiwakes. Now the kittiwakes will a male and a female pair will raise just one chick. So they'll lay one egg and incubate that egg just to raise one chick. Generally speaking, all the birds here at the Alaska Sea Life Center have an incubation time that runs between sort of 25 days for some of the ducks up to almost 45 days for the puffins. So they range between 30 and 45 days for most of the birds. And you can see down here toward the base of the cliff one of our burrows. Now this burrow will be occupied likely by Harriet and Antonio, a pair of tufted puffins. They don't appear to be present right now, but I'm going to share a little video of those puffins at the entrance of the burrow so you can see what it looks like. This is the time of year when they'll be collecting nesting materials. So they've got some grasses. It looks like Antonio headed into the burrow with a mouthful of grass, and Harriet monitoring closely from outside the burrow, checking on his progress, making sure he arranges it just so probably, and I'm sure nodding approvingly. So the puffins will get together. Typically puffins mate for life, and so they will get back together in the springtime when they return to the cliffs, and we'll see a lot of courtship behaviors from our birds as they reestablish those bonds. Then they're going to select a spot along the cliffs where they're going to put together a nest, and tufted puffins, horned puffins both, will raise just one chick each year. The male and the female will share the nesting duties equally. And so after the female lays the eggs, they will take equal turns, roughly 12-hour shifts, incubating that egg for, again, a little over 40 days until that egg hatches. And then they will take equal shifts feeding that chick after it hatches. And they're going to feed those chicks whole fish right from the moment that they hatch. So when you see puffins returning to their burrow with several fish in their beaks, usually stacked crosswise, that's because they're headed back to the burrow to feed those chicks. But they will take turns, again, doing that, the male and female. And because the male and female have equal duties on the nest, puffins, male and female puffins look exactly the same. So you can see this pair of puffins here. They both look exactly the same. There will be a male and a female. And because we can't tell just by looking at our birds which one is a male and which one is a female, we actually band them on the left leg for the females and the right leg for the males, so it's easier for us to tell them apart. So let's see, we've got a horned puffin over here. You can see it's banded on its left leg. That is a female. And if it were banded on the right, that would be a male. That's very different from our waterfowl, the duck species. You can see our king eiders here, 2 males and 2 females. The males are very, very brightly colored, and the females are much more of a mottled brown coloration. That's pretty typical for waterfowl because these birds will nest right down on the ground in many cases, and the females are the only ones who will actively sit and incubate on the nest, so they need to be camouflaged. That's very important for those waterfowl, as opposed to the males. Now, the male ducks have been very colorful all winter long for the most part because their job is to attract the females. There's a little bit of chasing going on. That's part of courtship here. So there's been courtship going on for a few months now with the ducks, where they've really been trying to attract each other. There's some head dips from one of the male king eiders, a lot of showing off. All those little head movements are just them trying to strut their stuff. And that's been going on for some time. With the alcids, like the puffins, they have really only made it into their breeding plumage just in the last few weeks. And here we can see a pair of pigeon guillemots potentially doing a little courtship. You can see some kind of billing where they're touching their bills together. And chasing is another important courtship behavior. Vocalization as well. You might be able to hear them. That little squeaky sound is the pigeon guillemots there. So there's a lot of very close, very active pairing between these males and females right now. Wing displays are another one where the birds will sort of puff out their chest and flap their wings to, again, just try to show off for their mate. The first birds that will begin nesting will likely be our harlequin ducks. And I don't see them out here, but most of the ducks will be the first ones to nest, with the exception of the king eiders. They'll be one of the last pairs to nest here in our bird habitat. And in between, we'll have all the alcids. One of the birds that does not build a nest at all is the common murre. You can see one of them here. And they are the birds that folks often confuse with penguins. They are very similar looking to penguins, but this is an example of 2 types of birds that are really not closely related at all that end up with very similar adaptations. And the reason for that is this common murre is the deepest diving species of seabird that can still fly. So in order to be such a great diver, it's going to have some features that are very similar to penguins, simply because that's what works, to be able to dive hundreds of feet underwater. The maximum depth that we've recorded for these common murres to dive down to is roughly 600 feet underwater. But again, they can still fly, so unlike the penguins, they have that ability. But similar to penguins, they stand almost straight up and down. That's because those feet are positioned all the way at the back of their body. They act as rudders at the back, and they want to be as streamlined as possible, so their legs, they have big feet, but those legs are all the way at the very back of that long, slender body. And so just like a penguin, they stand nearly vertically. And that's because that's an excellent diving bird adaptation. You can see that murre is really busily preening those feathers. Now, these murres will not build a nest. They will actually choose just a small ledge to lay their egg on. And they may be right over here on these small ledges, or sometimes they find small nooks and crannies toward the back, but they don't enter a burrow like some of these other birds will. The waterfowl, pretty soon, will be choosing nesting locations as well. Now, some of them may choose some of these nest boxes. We like to have a wide variety of spaces for our birds to choose, and each pair will individually choose a burrow or a nest box or a cliff ledge that suits them. We often get questions about how many birds we will raise each year. It actually depends quite a bit, but in order to be responsible with our animal populations, we gauge that from one year to the next. We want to make sure that there is a home for any birds we might be raising. So if it's a species that we would like to have more of, we may try to raise those birds. Or if there's another facility out there that is requesting certain species of birds, we can try to raise birds for those facilities. Here are harlequin ducks who have shown back up yet. And just like the king eiders, that male harlequin is beautifully colored, showing off for his mate, the female right behind him with just that little white spot on her face. And again, that's those waterfowl. They're going to nest right down on the ground. The male, in some cases, these duck species, apart from attracting the female, he's doing a great job right there, showing off. Apart from attracting the female, in some waterfowl species, the male will even perform distracting flights to try to take attention away from the nest. So those bright colors on the male can be really helpful for that as well. And that is very different from alcids, where we see just those bright colors. The reason why they can get away with all those bright colors is not because of necessarily performing distractions, but the way that they nest inside these burrows and way up on these cliffs, they're in protected locations where predators would not have access to them, so they're relatively safe. Just checking back in on our kittiwakes here. There was a little brief moment of activity there for a second, but I can see they're still basically just resting. You can hear the murres vocalizing a bit over here. Oh, now I just heard a puffin in the background. You probably were not able to hear that sound because the puffins are actually extremely quiet. I'm going to wait for a quiet moment here, and I'll try to make a puffin sound for you to hear. So the puffins make this sort of groaning noise, and it's very quiet. The next time you're in the Sea Life Center's aviary, if it's in the spring or summer especially, really listen carefully for those little groaning noises that'll almost sound like they're laughing with a deep voice sometimes, sort of a listen for those sounds. We're watching a little pair of horned puffins here. I'm going to leave the camera on them for a moment and see if they do any sort of courtship behavior. Right now they're just sort of side by side, but you never know when they might become a little bit more active. At the moment, they are simply enjoying each other's company in close proximity. All right, you can see some of our common murres are a little bit more active, so let's see if we can capture a little courtship behavior from them. So for those of you who have been missing the Sea Life Center aviary, I hope you're enjoying springtime. There's a little billing from the common murres and what we call allopreening. So the birds preen themselves. They sit there and take care of their feathers. But allopreening means taking care of your partner's feathers, basically. And so they will, each mate will separately take care of the other's feathers. That's called allopreening again. That's another way that these birds will help to reinforce those bonds that they've established. It's interesting, right now at the moment, the tufted puffins appear to be all back inside those burrows, almost exclusively. And that is one thing about this time of year. Sometimes you'll come out, and although many of the birds will be active, because the puffins are burrow nesters, they may completely disappear. This one here is likely one of our education birds. I can't recognize the individual birds at a glance. That's likely one of the education birds that tends to spend most of its time out here where the people are, because that's what it's most used to. Oh, there's a little wing display from the king eider, the female. Nice. All right, well, I'm going to give those kittiwakes one last chance One of them is going to be returning to the nest site in just a moment here. There we go. They always vocalize quite a bit when they fly around and come back to greet each other. I don't know if you can hear that. Still a little bit of vocalizing. There's a lot of vocalizing down here with the eiders, actually. Often hard to tell if they're saying hello to each other or fighting. They've got a pretty subtle call. All right. Someone came to get a really close look at us here. Murre coming over to see us. Curious about the camera, no doubt. And as things begin to reopen, we hope you all get a chance to come and visit us once we are back open to the public, which we hope to begin doing soon. Keep an eye out for press releases on opening hours and strategies, and we would love to have you all come visit us very soon to see the birds and the rest of the animals. And let me just say one last time, thank you for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed seeing the birds in the springtime from the comfort of your own home or your car, if you're sitting in the back seat watching on your phone. Hopefully not while you're driving. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great day. Take care. We hope to see you all very soon.